There we go. So today's presentation, as I just said, is called The Power of Scientists, Examples How to Raise Climate Change Awareness. I'm Dr. Franziska Elmer, and together with my colleagues who are going to introduce later on, we're going to talk to you about how we as scientists have this superpower to actually raise a lot of climate change awareness. And we're going to give examples of our own lives of how we do this. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about why we have to raise climate change awareness. In 2018, the IPCC report came out and it told us that we have 12 years to fix this mess. A lot of us didn't really understand what that meant. Some people said, well, is the world going to end in 12 years? No, it's not. But this is the time frame we still have to do really profound action and transformation, like system transformation in different systems. And if we don't do that, then our planet will go into a hothouse Earth scenario and slowly degrade into a place that isn't livable for us or for a lot of animals. But if we do that action, we will have a livable, regenerative planet that will sustain life. So this is really the most important time in human history. There's never been a time more important. Like this is more trivial than living in World War II, for example. And we are living in this time, and we have a lot of responsibility to really make this happen for us and for future generations. Well, why is this like that? Well, the really big point is that the way climate change works, it's not a linear process where you can just stop at one point when you say, okay, what we have now is as far as we want to go. We're going to slow down, get rid of our emissions, and we stay here. There are tipping points. So if we go over a certain point, then our Earth will fall over a cliff of some sorts, and you are not able to go back to how it was before. So these tipping points are really, really important and are really, really scary. Like I really don't want us to go past one of these tipping points. And there's actually 15 of them, and 9 of them are identified to be able to tip rather soon. If any of them tips, that will be catastrophic for humanity. So our goal as humanity and as humans should be that we make sure none of them tips. The problem is it's extremely hard to tell when they will tip. We thought that maybe they tip at 5 degrees above normal warming, so 5 degrees warming. But lately we have figured out they probably tipped already, some of them between 1 and 2 degrees. We are currently at 1.2 degrees warming. So really, the reason why we want to stay under 1.5 degrees is to lower the chances that one of these will tip. And maybe we are already too late. We don't know exactly. The other really scary thing about them is that if one of them tips, for example, the Arctic sea ice, then there will likely be a domino effect that makes other ones tip as well. And some of these tipping points, like the permafrost or the Amazon rainforest, when they tip, they will actually release more CO2 and methane into the atmosphere, causing more climate change and accelerating their own, accelerating what's happening to them. So the drought in the rainforest will get worse, more permafrost will be melting, and you have this really faster and faster loop of the climate changing, and we don't have any control anymore. So even at that point, if we go to net zero emissions, it won't matter because the natural system is emitting so much CO2 that we cannot, we don't have control over. So that's why we have to make sure we're not going over those tipping points. and we don't have much time to reduce our emissions to do so. The other side of the medal, why this is such an important decade, is that it's actually not that trivial of a task. Here you can see how much energy we are using and how much of that is oil, gas, and coal in purple, blue, and gray. And you see that we have increased exponentially our oil, gas, and coal use since the 1950s. So in all our lifetimes, whether or not you're young or you're older, we have doubled, tripled, or quadrupled our use. So if we started doing this action and getting rid of our emissions in 1990, it would have been a much easier task. And the same is true on the right. You can see how many anthropogenic masses we have. And that's also been going up exponentially. And you just see how much concrete is in there and aggregates, for example, gravel. Concrete uses a lot of CO2 to make, and it takes away natural space a lot of times. So we really are in a place where we have this exponential growth of something, and we need to get rid of that exponential growth and go exponentially down. So it's a huge, huge task. And I think most people who are aware of climate change and are aware of that we have to act aren't aware of how big of a task it is. And honestly, for myself, I always have to remind myself of how big a task it is. It's not just about recycling and not flying as much. It's about changing the whole system of how we live and work. But the good news is that we know how to do it. So we know that we have to cut global emissions by 7.6% every year, according to a UN report in 2019. And we know we have a lot of solutions as well. For example, Project Drawdown has come up with 100 solutions. Well, they haven't come up with the solutions, but they researched them of how much they can actually do, how much they cost, and what other benefits they have. So our governments and our society, or we as a global society, we know what we have to do, and we know we have the tools to do it. However, what we do isn't enough. So you can see in red the no climate policies, and in orange and yellow the current policies and the pledges. And yes, we are doing something, which is good. But then if you see the pathways to 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees, they are still way different from what our current policies and pledges are. So we need to do a lot more. With our current policies and pledges, we will likely hit those tipping points. And if we do, then our climate will go high to 4, 5, 6 degrees of Celsius of warming, to 9 meters of sea level rise, and we might as well have not done any policies at all. So it is really trivial that as a society, as governments, we are going on that 1.5 degrees path, and we are reducing by 7.6% our emissions every year, including this year, and including last year, where we kind of did because of COVID. But it also means that we have a lot to do this year, because those emissions don't accumulate over. And now we're actually emitting more than in 2019 before. So why aren't our governments doing more? Well, one of the reasons to blame is maybe us scientists. We did the science to find out what's happening with climate change. We found the solutions, and we talked about it for years and years. So you think we did our job. But apparently we didn't, because we are not acting like it's an emergency. Our governments aren't responding to climate change like they are to COVID. And why is it? Because we rang the alarm bells, we said this is an emergency, and then we went back to our desks to do our normal jobs. So we showed, okay, this is actually not an emergency. Like imagine if Fauci told Trump, hey, this is an emergency with COVID, and then he went back and didn't wear a mask and didn't do anything. Trump would have not trusted him. Of course, Trump didn't trust him anyways, but other people wouldn't have trusted him either. So we as scientists, we have to talk about this like an emergency because we are the ones people trust as experts. If we don't say it's an emergency, then nobody will believe it as it is. And as scientists, we have a lot of superpowers. First of all, we can decipher scientific literature. This stuff is really hard to read, and only a few of us in the world can actually do it and translate it into normal people's words. So we know what's happening, and we have to inform. A lot of us can actually choose what we want to research. So why not choose something which helps us tackle this crisis? A lot of us can choose what we want to teach. So make sure that when you teach your classes that you talk about climate change and you talk about it in a way that people realize it is an emergency. We have public speaking skills, especially the ones of us who do a lot of education. So we can go and give talks, and we're going to give good talks. We have writing skills. We can write blogs, we can write articles where people will understand what we're talking about. The media and the public look at us as experts. They find our profession interesting. So it's really easy for us to get into the media and talk about climate change. And lastly, we have all these listservs and we are well connected globally. So if we wanted to make a movement, it would be really easy for us to get everybody on board. So now I want to talk really briefly about what I do as a scientist, and then I introduce my friends and colleagues and let them talk to you about what they do with their superpowers. So the first thing I did as a scientist when I realized I had to use my superpowers is I changed my climate change lecture in marine ecology. This is what it looked like. And honestly, it didn't even tell me that we had a problem. It was just a lot of boring graphs. So I changed it to show the difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees of heating, which for my students who study coral reefs is extremely important because we really need 1.5 degrees or less to still have coral reefs. And then I showed them how long it will take until we reach that point if we keep going as we are, and really showed them how little time we have left. Next to that, I also actually quit my job last year to do a lot more climate activism. I became part of Extinction Rebellion, and I realized that as a scientist, I could give a lot of talks for them to get people interested in Extinction Rebellion. And I also realized that during the actions that are happening, that as a scientist who knows a lot of climate change, I'm a really good person to talk with passerbys or to give talks. Giving talks for Extinction Rebellion was actually really beneficial for my science career because like that, I got to give more and more talks. I got to be invited on panels, and I even got to give a TEDx talk. The same is true for my friend at Scientist Rebellion. He's going to be a panelist at the astrophysicist conference, and he's going to talk about civil disobedience there. So neither me or him would have gotten such talks if we just stick to talking about our science. But these talks, normally what happens is the people who go there already care about climate change. And the cool thing about talking to passerbys or giving talks at these actions from Extinction Rebellion or other groups is that these people often don't talk about climate change. They're disrupted in their daily life by this action. They are curious about what's happening, and it's a great spot to talk to people about climate change, hear what they have to say, and talk to them why it is important to you. So actually, that is a really powerful way of making an impact. Next, I want to introduce you my good friend and colleague, Catherine Jadot. She is an independent researcher and works in the Caribbean. And I used to be her intern once, and then we were co-teachers afterwards. There we go.
Thank you, Frank.
You're welcome.
Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. I'm excited to be here today and speaking to all of you and share my experience. So for the past few years, I've been trying to understand why so few people, even if they understand the enormous threat climate change is, why there are so few people taking action to actually make a difference. And even with this audience, I'm sure that many of you still wonder what you can do to really make a difference. Fun fact, did you know that 70% of the population in America believe that the climate is changing? 70% also agree that it will harm plants and animals and that it will harm future generations. But only 40% believe that it will affect us personally. So when you ask people, do you ever talk about this? 2/3 of Americans say never. And even worse, when you ask people, do you ever hear the media talking about this? Over 3/4 of people would say no, especially now with the pandemic going on. So it's a vicious circle. And what can we do to break that vicious circle? Well, the number one thing that we can do is the one thing that we are not doing. Talk about it. And we don't need to talk more about the science. We've done a lot of that. We need to start from the heart and why it matters to us. Starting with values that we truly share and care about. This is really the best way that we can connect with people. And we also need more hope. If all we hear are doom and gloom messages, it can paralyze us into inaction. Research has shown that fear is not what will motivate us for the long-term sustained change we need to fix climate change. Fear is what is designed to make us run away from the bear, right? Or at least run faster than the person next to us. What we need in those conversations is rational hope. Yes, we do need to recognize what is at stake. Of course we do. But we need to move past the doom and gloom messages and start talking about inspiring solutions, about a possible future that will inspire us to take action, using solutions that are practical, viable, and accessible, because they already exist. We have those solutions, like Fran was saying. And social science actually has shown us that feeling that we can be part of the solution is actually a much more effective way to change our minds about the reality of a problem than guilt-tripping everyone endlessly about that problem. So if you want more information about how to communicate about climate, check out the Yale program on climate change communication. They have an excellent study on the role of climate conversations with friends and family in changing people's belief and concern about climate change. How just casual discussions can actually start to change social norms. And this is really a key component of the problem and a key component of the solutions. And this is even more important if you are a scientist, because the public recognize scientists as experts in providing guidance to governments and other decision makers. So this is actually one of the actions that I do the most often. I decided to step up my game and engage in climate discussions with friends and family, even to strangers. So I have a target of 5 people that I try to speak to every week. It's not too much, it's reasonable, it's accessible. And the key is to do that in a compassionate and respectful way. So I also learned to listen to people's stories. You know, this really gave me an opportunity to understand the value of the person I'm talking with and start from the value we share. Then I decided to step up my game on social media, and I reactivated my Twitter account, where I'm the most active, the platform I'm the most active on. Again, talking about conservation, optimism, and the solution that we already have. So my handle, as you can see, is @1DrCat. Feel free to connect with me. And then all this action really started to get me engaged. And the next step for me has been to write a book. And the title is How It Doesn't End, Empowering Solution to Climate Change. So it's coming out this fall, September 1st. So keep an eye out for it. So if you are interested, you can also pre-order it on Amazon for 99 cents. And then I still wanted to go further and get engaged more. So I was thinking how I can combine my 2 passions in life, which are the oceans and triathlon. So next month, I will be launching a new initiative called Try for the Oceans, where I will engage with race directors to reduce the use of single-use plastic and talk to athletes about the solutions they can implement in their training to reduce their own impact on the planet. So like Fred was saying, we are in a state of emergency and we need all hands on deck to tackle the climate crisis. So yes, we need new policies to be put in place, but I believe that the politicians we have are only a reflection of the society we live in. So not everybody is comfortable with civil disobedience for climate action, but most of us are comfortable talking with friends and family. So why not start there and start about talking about climate solutions? And if you ever doubt that a single individual can make a difference, just think about Greta Thunberg. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. That was really inspiring. And thank you for everything you do to raise awareness for climate change. Next up, we have Alizee. Alizee is a dear friend of mine who I met on a research trip to a very remote island in an uninhabited island in the Turks and Caicos Islands. She is a dive professional and an artist, and from her dive work, she actually became more of a scientist and does a lot of scientific work in diving. And she has an extremely powerful story to tell of how she worked in the Turks and Caicos Islands against oil exploration.
Hi, good afternoon, good morning to everybody. So my name is Alizee Zimmermann, and I'm the Executive Director of the Turks and Caicos Reef Fund, but I've been volunteering with this nonprofit for the last 5 years since I moved home. I was born and raised in the Turks and Caicos, and these islands are very, very important to me. And recently, last fall, I got a message on the 13th of October from a friend saying, you know, what do you think about this oil exploration bill that's happening? The public consultation ends tomorrow. And I was like, wait, what? What oil bill? What public consultation? So I did a little bit of research, just a quick online search, and there was a post that was made by the government that said that there would be public consultation for 2 weeks with access to the draft bill. So we started looking for it and couldn't find it. And it really made me think, okay, how is this just happening? I mean, oil exploration is a pretty big deal, especially in a place with very small percentage likelihood of ever finding anything. So I messaged a few friends and it just snowballed into a movement where a lot of people started realizing that no one really knew about it and no one had a full understanding of what was happening. So quite a few local friends and public figures, lawyers and artists came together and started making a lot of noise about it, getting the public consultation period extended. And as of right now, we're not exactly sure where that stands, but so far it's given people a lot more say on what happened. So Bernicia Cox, for example, she actually did a panel with different members of government and the National Trust, which is another organization here to preserve the history and environment of the Turks and Caicos, about oil, which really opened up the reach that we had. There were some public newspaper articles about it because we made a petition on change.org, and I think within a week we had 1,500 signatures, which for a small population was quite good. Next slide, please, Fran. And so a lot of people just started wondering what was going on. And all I did was just reach out. Now, I reached out a lot, to be fair. I think Dom can tell you, I think I messaged him 2 or 3 times a day until he kind of spoke up. But he has an outreach here that I could never do. He is an amazing artist, lawyer, and becoming quite a public figure here in the Turks and Caicos. And so his decision to then talk about it was even greater, had a greater effect than anything that I could have done. And so it started just becoming more and more widespread. And it was, I mean, it was a difficult time, but it was empowering to see people from the Turks and Caicos joining together and from all different walks of life, including artists. We had some really great creative things that came out of this, because if we look at the next slide, we can also see that the Bahamas has been going through a similar situation with the oil exploration there. So a good friend of mine who I did my training with in the Bahamas, Alana, she's a marine scientist, and this very powerful image that Andre Musgrove took of her to show that we are all connected, that there is something much more important that we need to protect, more than money, more than the tiny bit of commission they would have made and the environmental disasters that would have happened. And then another amazing artist here in the Turks and Caicos, Hezron, made this within like a day of it becoming a thing. He just made this poster and started raising awareness, getting people to email Petroleum Bill 2020 at gov.tc to demand a more public consultation and explanation. So it was really empowering to see artists and scientists come together and very quickly put, kind of like what Fran has done here, actually, very quickly bring people together and create something that can have a snowball effect and movement. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Alizee. I think this is such a great story of how just reaching out to a few people can make a snowball movement. Next up is Elinor, which I only know through email actually, and from a few chats and Zoom calls. But we bonded over the fact that so many coral reef scientists seem to do nothing about speaking up for climate change and what's happening to our coral reefs. She's a PhD student in Israel, and she's going to talk to us a bit about what she does in her free time.
Hi, so thanks for the introduction. Can you hear me, by the way?
Yes.
Okay. So I basically thought I'd start with sort of why I got into activism. Do you have the slide? I can't see it, just a sec.
Yes, the slide is
So
up.
basically, oh, okay. I basically started out a couple of years ago. I was just starting a PhD program, and I had started trying to figure out what I would research, and I realized that none of the things that I wanted to research would have any significant effect on solving the climate crisis. So I considered maybe quitting and trying to take a year off to just focus on activism, and that's actually when I started talking to Franziska. And then I ended up deciding to stay, but I made activism a big part of my life. So I started out by joining Extinction Rebellion locally, and then I realized that there was nothing going on at the university, so I helped found a student group called Students for Climate, which is now national, which I sent out a couple messages on Facebook trying to plan an initial meeting, and about 20 people showed up, which was very surprising. And it sort of snowballed from there. And after that, I started becoming very, very involved in all sorts of activism. There was also a big political movement here against the prime minister, and ended up joining another group called Socialist Alternative. And through that, I joined the Workers' Union for graduate students. And we recently managed to actually pass some letter of support of the climate change movement directed towards our university to try and get them to take action. And that's just sort of a general overview, but I've been spending the last year and a half participating in planning and in being involved in direct actions to try and have some sort of effect in terms of civil disobedience on the surroundings. I will say that there is a lot of research on civil disobedience as a means of trying to cause change, and we have managed to move something incrementally, but unfortunately we're still too small to create a very big effect using only these methods. I thought I'd put a few pictures of myself in various situations. I suppose the conclusion from this is that I like being chained to things, but I do think that it's significant. All of these photos, one of them we are blocking a Bazan, which is this petrochemical factory that is highly damaging to the entire city of Haifa. There's a very high level of cancer and general sickness in the area, and this is part of a very long campaign. This action happened in addition to this big protest that came to join this blockade that we were doing, and it was very powerful, but it wasn't like a single action. It was part of a campaign involving a lot of local citizens, and we came to sort of highlight this disparity between what people want and what's actually happening. Direct actions can have a very big effect in terms of getting into the media and trying to raise awareness towards something. But by themselves, they don't, I'm not trying to say that by themselves they will solve any sort of problem. It's just a tool that I think we should use. And sort of, I'm sorry, this is a little bit disorganized, but sort of what I've realized from the last sort of year and a half of both climate activism and trying to do a PhD is that, first of all, in general, a lot of the public doesn't understand even if they understand that something's going on in climate change, they don't understand what a big emergency it is. And many environmental movements focus on sort of lobbying politicians to try and get them to act. But politicians will not act unless they feel significant public pressure. So something that we need to do is take what we have as scientists, our knowledge, our ability to communicate, and take it to the public, do a lot more public outreach. And when we do that, we don't just need to tell people about the problem and give them solutions. We should give them solutions, but we should also encourage them to organize and create civil movements that can have a larger effect than individuals doing something. And another thing I realized is that even in academia, so even people who know exactly what's going on are just incredibly passive and comfortable in their situation that they do absolutely nothing about it. I'll give an example. I recently heard my advisor and my lab manager having this very intense argument over whose generation is at fault for the climate and ecological crisis, which of course seems crazy to me because it doesn't matter. What matters is what they're going to do about it, which in their case is pretty much nothing. So I think as scientists, I saw it as sort of my duty to go out and participate in civil disobedience. But I think what I've learned is that I don't just need to do that. I need to use the skills I have or whatever credibility I can get from being a scientist to speak out within academia as well. And I think that's something that Scientist Rebellion is trying to do, to sort of shake up this culture we have of just telling. We research and we tell politicians what's going on, and then we leave it as though the responsibility is off of us. And I think especially the younger generations, we feel this pressure to do something more than just research. And I think when we look around us and we realize what we have to do, we need to do more outreach. We need to do more. We need to organize. We need to maybe do civil disobedience because we need to save the planet. And I personally would like to live on a planet that is livable and not sort of passively accept what's going on, like what I feel like most of the scientists around me are doing. So thanks. Thanks to Fran for organizing this.
Thank you, Elinor. That was really passionate, and I think it really showed how civil disobedience can be very powerful. Next person up is Michael. He became a good friend of mine because we were both involved in Extinction Rebellion Luzern, and he actually does a lot of work at his university, Hochschule Luzern, with a group of students who are helping or demanding the school to become more sustainable.
Thank you, Fran. Yeah, so I want to tell a little bit just about my personal experience. I'm a pure mathematician. I lecture at Luzern University, as Fran said, where I mainly teach engineers. So from that already, you can guess that by my research or by my teaching, I have not that big of a possibility to cause an impact. But nevertheless, I became aware of the seriousness or the huge problem we have about 2 years ago. I was never politically active before. But I decided I have to do something. So the first thing I did was join Extinction Rebellion at a time here in Lucerne in Switzerland. I blocked bridges, I got fines. I'm still waiting for the trial now because we opposed to those things. Yeah, it was a great experience, I think, and we tried a lot of things here. But I soon noticed that central Switzerland is quite conservative. People are rather reserved. You're not used to exposing yourself or protesting. So it was really hard also to get a lot of people here. So we were a small group, maybe 3, 4 in Lucerne. There were bigger groups in other parts of Switzerland. And then Corona came, which made it even more difficult to do things like this. So I decided I want to try something more local with the people here I know. And yeah, I felt, you know, university has such a huge impact it can have on the people we're educating to be leaders and to be more active in the future. So yeah, the idea came up of doing something here at my university. And yeah, by luck, some people got together, we met, and a group mainly of students started organizing. And we had the first thing they got to do was to do a podium discussion with the rector of our school about what is the school doing, what should it do. And the school is, of course, trying to say, yeah, we're doing a lot, but from our perspective, it's definitely not enough. There is so little awareness in first of all, in teaching. Many students are not aware of what's going on. The engagement itself of the school of being a role model of reducing their emissions, there is not much happening there. So then we decided, yeah, we're just going to start to do more pressure. The first thing we did after that was we wrote a catalog of demands or expectations that we have for the school. And this was already during the Corona lockdown. So the difficulty was how to get to more people, how to spread this thing. And yeah, then we did, we decided we just send a mass email, which was not legal. So in a sense, it's also civil disobedience. We sent it to 10,000 students and workers here. And we sent it together with a, how you say, a questionnaire, a very simple one, where we just like sent them, look, we have done this. We'd like the school to be much more engaged on what we're doing. And do you agree with that? Do you think that's a good idea? If not, do you have something you don't like about what we wrote? And the feedback was very surprising. So we got back about 1,200 answers, which for just an email was quite good. And I think 90% of the people agreed with our demands. And they wanted the school to do more. So this costs a lot of, yeah, because the school got aware of this, it also costs a lot of pressure on the school to do more. So yeah, those were the first steps. And since then we've been meeting with more people joined. After this, we had 200 people who answered and said they want to help us. In the end, it's not that easy. I mean, from those 200, maybe 20 more actually joined and are trying to do something. But it's growing, and we're still working on how to reach more people, to build up pressure on the school. And yeah, and it's also great fun. So yeah, what I also noticed was we got a few emails back from people who otherwise I wouldn't have noticed, that they also didn't want to join, but they sent us very encouraging emails and like basically saying, yeah, you should make more pressure, you should do even more. So that made me aware of that there is this big part of people who would like to do more, and for some reason or another, either they're maybe afraid of exposing themselves, or they don't have time, or whatever, they for some risks they don't want to do things. But yeah, it was good to know that. And so kind of a takeaway for me is, even if they could not contribute, it kind of motivates to keep doing these things, and it gives us a little bit of momentum and support. And the other thing I just noticed is, so we try to, we meet regularly, we discuss what we can do, we try to figure out what the school is doing, we find people we can talk to. But the other thing which I found important is that it should, whatever you do as activism, it should be fun for you. And the social aspect of meeting with the people and building up kind of a community, and also doing stuff which is not constantly centered about this problem, helps a lot. Yeah, that's it for my part.
Thank you, Michael. Yes, I think your story is such a good example that there's so many people who want to do something but don't start, and then once you start, you see that there's so many other people who want to do the same, who either join you or support you. Next, I want to introduce you guys to Mar. She is, together with me, co-hosting a podcast, and both Mar and I are very enthusiastic about this weird algae called sargassum, which we think will revolutionize the world and bring us really big carbon solutions. So she will talk a bit about that and how she changed her research towards that.
Thanks, Fran, for inviting me to this really interesting panel. Sorry that I missed a couple of your contributions before. My boss just came by and I had to talk to him. So yeah, I just want to share with you really quickly how my experience has been. And for me right now, my fight is mostly within academia. So outside of academia, I do outreach, but that's about it at the moment. And so for me, the story goes, I studied marine microbiology because I thought the solution to the climate crisis, which already 10 years ago for me, it was clear it was going to be the challenge of these decades and of this century. And that's why I studied marine microbiology. But then when I started studying that and I decided to go on with my master's and my PhD, at that time, it was the times where, this is not that long ago, it's like 10 years ago, people were like, yeah, we need to study what's happening in the Arctic and in the Antarctic because they're melting so fast and we don't understand what's happening and so on. So I got involved in projects studying the productivity and the algae in the Arctic Ocean. And I got very excited about it. But at the same time, every year when I was going up there to the Arctic and seeing how year after year, things got worse and worse until one year we didn't even have ice to sample the algae that were growing in the ice. So basically the whole project was useless. And then I started realizing, okay, this is not what I want to do as a scientist. I mean, I did ring the bell often enough. I did write enough papers saying, hey, we're screwing up the Arctic, like everything is melting. There's enough evidence of it. I think it has actually by now already reached one of those tipping points that you, Fran, were talking about at the beginning. So Arctic sea ice is definitely way below what we expected it to be at this time. And so I think the science on that side is clear, and it's kind of useless to keep on going every year to the Arctic to tell the world, yes, the Arctic is melting. Yes, the algae are changing. They're doing different things. We don't know what's happening. And so that's why I slowly tried to change my focus of my research and try to focus more on solutions and not problems. And for that, of course, I realized, okay, the solutions are not in the Arctic. Like, we're not going to solve climate change by doing anything in the Arctic. And so that's why I moved toward tropical regions where productivity and carbon sequestration happen faster and in bigger quantities. And that's how I got really interested in sargassum. And that's how I met Fran, because I think sargassum is this magical algae that basically, it's a macroalgae, so it has a really high carbon to nutrient ratio, so it can sequester a lot of carbon per unit of nutrient that you're giving to it. And it basically floats in the ocean, accessing all these nutrients that are otherwise not available for algae on the coasts. So it can grow in huge masses, and it can basically help us revert what we're doing now by burning fossil fuels, which were basically plants and algae that sunk down and stayed there for millennia. And we put all that in the atmosphere, and I think sargassum can help us bring that down again. Now, inside of academia, as many of you might know, it's not so easy to move fields, even if it's just moving from microalgae to macroalgae. People don't like that. They're like, no, that's not your niche. You're an expert in Arctic phytoplankton. And so I do see sometimes some resistance to, start working on something that is not what you did your PhD on. And so that's my fight at the moment. I have to talk to a lot of people and convince a lot of people that I'm also able to measure carbon content in sargassum and not just in Arctic phytoplankton. But I mean, that's moving. And what I think it's also a positive note is that because we have no other solution right now, people start coming to you when you have solutions. So if you work towards solutions and you start developing solutions, people will come to you because people want to be inspired with the positive side of climate change. People don't come to you if you only report the bad news. They will, of course, listen to you, hopefully, sometimes more, sometimes less, but they get exhausted and pessimistic when you only tell them Arctic sea ice is decreasing every year more and more. But if you then continue the sentence with, but if we reduce emissions by this and this, and we do some carbon negative emission technologies in the ocean by doing this and this with this algae, then people suddenly get a little bit more optimistic and they start moving forward and doing something. And I mean, you all touched upon this, right? That fear is just not what is driving us to do things, but rather hope and looking forward to solutions. So yeah, it doesn't matter what you're working on, what you're doing. I'm sure there's a way that you can apply your knowledge and your skills to be part of the solution.
Very cool, Mar, and I hope we get some funding and some support to actually do all these things together. Next up, we got Lisa, who is a social scientist and sustainability expert. And I learned first about her podcast and started listening to her podcast, which is called My Climate Diet. And then in her podcast, she talked about doing a workshop on figuring out utopias for 2030. So how do we want 2030 to be? And I joined her workshop, and through that, I got to know her and her work a lot better. And she's going to talk to us a bit about her work, but also about impact, like how different things you do have different impacts.
Thank you so much. I had a bunch of slides, but I'm thinking in terms of time, I want to kind of quickly go through the key points that I wanted to make so that hopefully we have a couple minutes to chat to each other and hopefully get some thoughts from the participants. So yeah, as Franziska said, I've been kind of doing a little bit of everything since finishing my PhD in political science. My bachelor was in film and television, so I'm never really doing the same thing for very long, it seems. But the main points that I wanted to make about impact is in doing my podcast, My Climate Diet, I really became a guinea pig myself for climate action. And I framed that as individual action and how it affected my carbon footprint. So my very first suggestion would be, if you don't know what your carbon footprint is, you need to figure it out. Because I think if we care about the climate crisis, there are a couple of key numbers that we need to know. And one of them is, well, if this were a classroom, I would ask you all, do you know what your carbon footprint is? And do you know what it needs to get to by 2030? But every human on the planet, if we want to be equitable, has by 2030, 2.8 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent that you can emit per year. And right now we're at about 5.7. And that obviously varies widely from the average American, which is about 20 tons, to the average African, which is less than 1 ton per person per year. So you can see at that level, it gives you a different way of understanding, okay, what are the actions that I need to take and what actions make impact? And I don't know, but if you're like me, you've spent a lot of time as kind of a vaguely green person reading all of those green media articles that say, oh, well, you need to go from plastic bags to paper bags. You need to go to the reusable coffee cup. You need to stop using straws. Well, once I went into the numbers behind that, I realized saving a plastic bag saves 10 grams of carbon dioxide equivalent. 10 grams. So that's essentially nothing if we're talking on the scale of multiple billions of tons that we need to be saving, right? Whereas something like changing your bank account, like I did in the first year of my podcast, that changed 1 ton of carbon dioxide. So in the first year of my podcast, I went down from about emitting 4.5 tons of carbon dioxide in 2017 to, in 2018 to 2 tons in 2019. And half of that I got just by changing my bank account. So in thinking about impact, one of the things that the lessons that I've learned is start somewhere, start doing anything. And I think all of these examples have been really great examples of using your networks, using your expertise, and using your interest and enthusiasm to get the ball rolling. Because just starting is great. But then as you get going, keep looking around and not just moving in terms of acting, but also moving in terms of absorbing more information, and particularly about what the impacts are of your actions. So one book that I really recommend is, oh, wow, you can't really see this, How Bad Are Bananas? This is actually the old version, but it's by Mike Berners-Lee, and it's really interesting in helping understand the scale of the climate crisis, from the negligible impact of a plastic bag to the huge impact of where you live, of what you drive or deciding not to drive. And that really helps understand the context in which different actions happen. At the same time, thinking about things this way is a challenge, because a lot of the examples that we had today that are so motivating, it's impossible to quantify the carbon savings, right? Of being involved in Extinction Rebellion, of, you know, changing what's happening at your university, of taking political action to stop oil exploration. And these are much more important, right, than our personal actions in terms of our seeing ourselves as consumers. So that's kind of the third lesson, is to be mindful and humble about what you can measure in terms of impact and what you maybe can't. But even if you can't measure, you know, many of these really great stories in terms of carbon dioxide savings, we can still measure them in terms of people we've reached, in terms of our feeling of making a difference. Like, and here you can, if you reflect, get a good sense of, okay, what has the bigger impact, right? So the last point that I want to make, and then I'm going to stop monologuing, is to keep expanding your scope. And I think that this is one thing that I have learned, and I really get the sense from the other speakers that you've also learned this, and this is something we can maybe discuss, is even starting at the smallest action, it feels good, it feels right, and it makes you want to go bigger. So as you reflect, as you gain more knowledge, and as you check yourself of what are the impacts I'm having, how can I have more impact, you can take bigger actions. And I think Fran put that very nicely, that I started, you know, as in my little political science bubble, and then I made my little podcast, and then I started a workshop series, and things keep getting bigger. And it sounds like we all are kind of on this path. So I want to encourage all of you to take the next step on the path, whatever it might be, and Godspeed to you, because time is running out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And just before we open up for discussion and questions, I think one of the big takeaways from a lot of people today was that their groups are making a difference, but because their group is still very small, the difference they could make if they were a big group, they cannot achieve yet. So what these groups really need are more people on the streets, more people speaking up in the universities, more people doing science, just more people doing stuff. So one of the most important things you can do is figure out groups near to you, or if you want, you can become part of Scientist Rebellion, which is global and virtually connected. So even if you're on a tiny island where nobody has, or in a town where nobody has a group, you can be part of a global group that that is meeting virtually, and start working together and making these groups bigger and making these voices bigger, because the more people we are, that makes those voices stronger. It's not how strong these people yell, it's also about how many people are yelling, and we need more people yelling at these events. And so it doesn't matter what are you happy to do. If you're into civil disobedience, if you think it's too scary for you, there's a lot of things you can do, and we need you to help us, and we need you to be part of these groups. So if anybody has a question, and I see we're 35 people in here, so maybe just raise your hand and I will call on you so you can unmute yourself. Claudia, you got your hand up?
Hi, everybody. My name is Claudia. I'm located in Colombia. So I am friends with Fran as well, and she has taught me a lot of things. So my question today would be, I'm living in a developing country, and I don't know if some of you know a bit of the social issues that we have, which are, we can be so much of a rebel in the events or in our daily lives. Mar, I don't know where are you from, but in Colombia it's very difficult to be an activist. A lot of them end up dead, and people don't like to talk a lot about that because it's very dangerous. So the question today would be, how could you be more like to open up more about these kind of topics without doing so much of a rebel? You know, like people feel afraid of speaking up because a lot of them end up dead. So I am currently doing something through an NGO. It's called Coral Call, and we try to reach people with different activities to talk to them about climate change and conservation of our natural resources, like a lot of topics. And we think we can do more, but how do you think, I don't know who can answer this question, what can we do on this side of a bit of safety? I would say we want a bit more safety, you know, like to transmit this information to other people without putting our lives at risk. And yeah, that's it. That would be my question.
Yeah, let me start a bit. So I think you're very right that some people or some places where you are, it's going to be a lot harder to do civil disobedience or be a rebel because there's a lot more risk involved. And definitely from my own experience, I wouldn't tell anybody to get into civil disobedience if they're risking their lives or risking really hard punishment. That's not the point of it. This is something that privileged people should do who are living in the country they have a passport in, who are not going to get deported and who are not going to get killed for this type of action. Now, how can you talk up more without doing so? I mean, I guess we had a few examples today. Like what Alizee did is probably a good example. If there's something happening where you can have a petition going, that's definitely good to do. Make sure you get into the media. And I know you're part of the media training we are starting right now. So just by having more articles in the media about the climate crisis and using the right words and calling it a crisis, an emergency, I think that will help as well to change people's perspective on this. And just the work you do, like, you know, while you are teaching the kids about recycling, while you are doing cleaning, while you are cleaning up the different rivers, you can always have those conversations that Catherine talked about with normal people about it and talk from your heart why this is an important issue. And I think these things do make a huge difference as well. You don't always have to go onto the streets and rebel in that way.
Okay, thank you.
And then we had, I saw another hand up, but it went down since.
Can I add something, if that's okay?
Yes, please.
I think it's really good that you brought this up. I mean, it's clear that some of us live in countries where we have the privilege to do these things in public spaces, and the worst that will happen to us is that we'll be minorly imprisoned and released. And clearly a lot of people are working with completely different starting positions, and there's a lot of, as I've heard a lot about indigenous activists being murdered. And I think maybe we don't have the answers for your situation because, I mean, we don't have that experience. So there are a lot of indigenous activists, including ones that I think have managed to not be killed, that would probably be a better source of information. And I feel I can't, not that I need to give you advice, but nothing that I will say will be relevant for where you live because I don't know any of the situation there. And I think most of us come from highly privileged positions where we have the option to do a lot of different things. And maybe if you have connections to these activists, or if you would like help to try to find them, maybe we could put you in contact with them and then they would give you much better advice, I think. Thanks. Sorry.
Do we have any more questions or comments or ideas? I don't see any more questions. So unless somebody gets brave enough to ask something, I think we also a bit at time. Oh, we have a question from Keith.
Okay, so I'm very new to all of this stuff, but I am a photographer just getting into this kind of activism in the Bahamas. I just want to know if you guys have any tips for photographers or for a photographer who is new to environmental activism.
I see Alizee has her finger up. Do you have something to say?
Yeah, hi Keith. I think there's so many opportunities for photographers to do a lot, especially around the Caribbean, well, actually anywhere. But being in the Turks and Caicos, I'm very close. I've seen some amazing things. What Andre Musgrove is doing with Alana as one of his very common models, but taking photographs of people in the environment and showing those contrasting changes, and taking photographs of people of color to represent the islands where you are, to reach out to the communities that live in those islands. I'll put my email address in the chat box, but I have quite a few friends in the Bahamas, including Nikita Shulroll, who does Young Marine Explorers, who really work in activism there and increasing education and outreach for young Bahamians to connect to nature. So please feel free to reach out to me about that. I mean, for basic advice, I would say just try and get those powerful images, those striking images, and then just sharing on social media platforms, and being able to connect the storytelling to the science.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have any advice for Keith? I think Alizee's advice is really useful, and being so close to the Bahamas, she definitely knows how things work out in the islands as well. Well, it doesn't look like it, but I think Keith, Alizee will get you in touch with some really cool people in the Bahamas, and you will probably have so much work to help them out that you don't know what else to do afterwards. I think I know Nikita. I just, if it's the same Nikita, I met her a few weeks ago, and she does incredible stuff, actually. She's involved in so many community projects, and it's really community focused. And if you start working with her, you will make a huge impact and difference for the Bahamas and the people living there and the marine ecosystem. I don't see anybody else's hand up. So if you have a question, unmute now and ask it. Or otherwise, I think we have spoken now for a bit over an hour and 15 minutes. I hope you learned something today. Even though I knew all these people personally and they're my friends and good colleagues, I definitely learned a lot today, and I got really inspired by their stories and all the different ways we as scientists can make a difference. And I think it's so powerful if we actually use our power to do so. And I hope a lot of you got inspired. I put in the chat the Scientist Rebellion website and also the social media. As I said in the beginning, when maybe not all of you were on, this webinar I put together as part of the first Global Scientist Rebellion. It's not a civil disobedience webinar, or like it's not civil disobedience to make this webinar. You all came here on your own terms, but it was to help people understand what type of actions we are doing as scientists. And this week there will be people on hunger strike. There will be people pasting abstracts of papers at their universities, at government buildings, and there will be a lot more webinars like this happening, and people changing their lectures to a climate lecture to do educational disobedience. So if you think this is something for you, check us out. If you think it's going to be interesting to watch us, to hear about the people doing the different things, go to the social media, go to the YouTube channel and check out why people are doing this and give them a like, support them with a comment, because yes, people will be not eating for 3 or 4 days. And I think that's a really big thing to do. And just some nice words below their video will really go far. And thank you all for coming here and listening to us.
Thank you, Fran, for organizing.
Great thing.
Yeah, thanks, Fran.
Thank you very much. And thanks, fellow speakers, for the lovely stories. They were very motivating.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.